The VA knows that they have to project their budget out and be ready to handle this financial load. They don't want to skimp on veterans' disability benefits. And if they can see you now and do something as simple as hearing aids today in your 40s or 50s, they know that you're probably going to maintain your health and your mental cognition longer just because you have hearing aids. And it'll be cheaper in the long run to give you hearing aids in your 40s for 30 or 40 years than it will be to try to catch up when you're in your 70s with hearing aids.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual Podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Today on the show, we're excited to welcome back Doug Nordman. Doug Nordman's a legend in the military personal finance community. He joined us back in 2022, over 3 years ago, on episode number 31. He served 20 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy submarine force and retired in 2002 at the ripe old age of 41. Him and his spouse, a retired Navy reservist, reached financial independence in 1999 using a high savings rate, and they've lived in Hawaii for over 36 years. Their daughter, Carol, was born and raised on Oahu. These days, Doug enjoys surfing, grandparenting, slow travel, writing, public speaking, reading, home improvement, personal finance meetups, and more surfing. He's the author of The Military Guide to Financial Independence and Retirement, available on Amazon, and founder of militaryfinancialindependence.com. Along with his daughter, Carol, he's the co-author of Raising Your Money Savvy Family for Next Generation Financial Independence. He's also terrible at picking short book titles, and they publish that through Choose 5 Media. Military personal finance is an important family topic for Doug, almost as important as surfing. He donates all of his writing and speaking revenue to military-friendly charities. So without further ado, let's welcome Doug Nordman to the show. How are you? I mean, I don't think I've seen you.
Yeah, no, doing fine. We're thinking about making a trip to North Island this fall. We're still trying to pick out dates and locations, but Auckland looks like it can keep us busy for at least 3 weeks.
Yeah, so the city itself, I find, is a bit boring, but as soon as you get an hour or two outside the city, there's plenty to do. Let's talk about VA disability compensation. This is a topic that I really haven't touched on the podcast before. I kind of felt like it's a third rail almost. And even though I went through the process myself, I haven't really talked openly about why I did it, how I did it, what the outcome was. And I think a lot of people are maybe embarrassed, or there's just seems like there's a lot of emotional baggage to this veteran benefit that you don't hear about with the GI Bill, or you don't hear about with military pension. So maybe we could just start there. Why is there so much emotional baggage around?
I don't know exactly what pilots have to put up with in the Air Force, but in the submarine force, if you had the slightest sniffle or some kind of chronic illness or any kind of situation that made you worried that you were getting sick, the chain of command would worry about that too. And you would not necessarily be beached, but you might be removed from certain duties because, you might be on medication or something that would interfere with your ability to handle weapons or engineering. And you learned fairly early on in your career to try to take care of yourself, of course, try to take care of your own health. But if you had a problem come up, you would think about whether or not it would keep you from making that next mission, that next underway, that next deployment. And you tended to minimize your symptoms. And after a while, you get used to that. You get used to not talking to the medic, not talking to the corpsman unless you absolutely need to. And you understand where you can draw the line between sharing confidences and actually saying something that might end up having to have you temporarily removed from your duties and put on some other kind of standby status or some kind of profile. And when you get to the VA at the end of your obligation and you're starting to think about separating or retiring, you've got years, maybe a couple decades of that kind of attitude before you start separating and start going through the physical process with the Veterans Administration and with the separation physical with the military. And I've heard the joke that 80% of all pilots suddenly develop sinusitis in the last 3 months of active duty. And frankly, it's not that much different in the submarine force. We all have little things that we've been hiding, that minor problem with an ankle or that thing that was a problem with getting around, just a weak knee or a sprained ankle, things like that. So it's hidden and you're accustomed to hiding it, and you also tend to minimize it. I feel fine. I'm good. I'll be all right. This should get better on its own. We don't need to talk about it. And in fact, it's ironic that while you're at the VA disability screening, they want to know when your mobility feels limited. They want to know as you bend your leg when your knee starts to complain, or they want to know when you start climbing up a staircase how many steps it takes until your knees start to feel a pain. They don't want to see how tough you are. They want to know when the pain starts.
It's not a challenge.
Well, again, we might be a little competitive about this, and we might be, again, minimizing our symptoms. So that when you go to the VA disability screening, the doctors, of course, have seen this in 150 patients more than we ever will, but we have to remember ourselves that we're trying to explain in the doctor's terms what limitations we have. So when you're in the military and you go to the medical system or the physical system in the military, they want to get you returned to active duty and make you fit to fight. That's the goal.
Right.
Whether you cooperate with that goal or not is maybe a little bit of push and pull. When you're going to the Veterans Administration, it's no longer about fitness to fight. It's about, is your ability to provide for your family impaired by any of your physical or mental symptoms? That's all they care about. Are you unable or impaired to provide for your family? Now, ideally, the VA does not see veterans sleeping under highway overpasses, but also the VA acknowledges that things that we might have been exposed to or done during our time in the military have made us vulnerable, not only with long-term diseases, but also possibly cognition and maybe even health span and lifespan. Our longevity might be permanently inflicted by whatever we, at the time, thought was perfectly normal. So all these things swirling around from a career in the military come down to that discussion that you have with the separation physical with the active duty doctor and the VA disability screening on the way out, right? Benefits, delivery, discharge up to 180 days before you separate or retire. And again, you have to go through this and try to figure out what problems you have. I know when I sat down with my veteran service officer, the VA has a crew of veteran service officers. You can find them all over the country and around the globe on the VA's website. And they're there to help. They're paid by the VA. They're sponsored by veterans advocacy organizations. They're there to help you, and somebody else is paying them to make sure they do a good job for you. And when they go through a medical record, I have 1,000 pages of VA records in my medical record. I mean, it's all on a CD-ROM, but that's 1,000 pages. And not only are they able to page through that in about 20 minutes because they've seen that and they do that every day, but they also now, the last time I went and saw the VA compensation and physical exam doctor, he had an AI system reading the doctor's notes for him. Right. I was shocked.
Yeah.
It's just like Google Translate to them. They just read the doctor's scribbles automatically. So right off the bat, they had what they needed to look at, and they could see that there was a symptom. They could see that it was connected to my service. They could see that it was getting worse, and they could see what the criteria were that they needed to do something about it. So all of that is fairly straightforward to a veteran service officer who turns you over to the doctor who does the compensation and pension exam. Once you finish that, then the Veterans Administration actually has a rater look at it. So you've got at least 2 people involved in the whole process, and usually 3. And for the veteran service officer especially, he or she is your advocate for getting you through the process. We've talked about this a little bit before, but it turns out that the higher the disability rating you may be eligible for, the more issues you may be dealing with in your time after the military. The people who need the Veterans Administration benefits and services the most are the people who are least able to navigate that labyrinth, that gauntlet to get to what they have already paid the price for. And now the VA is just trying to compensate you for your inability or your reduced ability to care for your family. All of that, again, makes it very difficult to come out and tell the VA exactly what's going on. And I'm not exactly a role model myself. I did not understand any of this when I was going through the transition program, and it took me literally years, almost a decade, to do something about it.
Before we talk about your personal experience, I want to talk about your father's personal experience.
Oh.
There was a article in the New York Times in the last couple of years. It was about alcoholism amongst seniors, but under the current there, I think there was a backstory where he was able to receive care because of his military service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That was Paula Spann's The New Old Age column, and the article was talking about the rise of alcoholism in seniors. I've opted out of that myself. I've been sober for a couple decades now. But anyway, The whole deal was that in addition to aging, cognition impairments, and the dementia influenced by alcohol, you are in a situation where somebody needs care and the family, frankly, it's usually the adult children, may not know what benefits mom and dad are eligible for from their service in the military. And in my case, as soon as we entered into the emergency room of the hospital and finding a skilled nursing facility for dad's treatment and then finding a care facility, as soon as we got into that pipeline, which again, everybody has far more experience with that than you do. You're learning about it the hard way the first time, and there's a deadline. The very first thing they said was, does he have a DD-214? And they're explaining a DD-214 to me because they have no idea who I am. But I said, I understand a DD-214. I just don't know. I said, he was in the Army, but I don't even know where his DD-214 is. Now, I knew enough about what he had done in the 1950s to remember that and to go back on the internet and look up what it took to be considered a veteran in the 1950s. And it turned out, no, he's not eligible for anything. We don't have to worry about DD-214s. We don't have to worry about benefits. I'm sorry, he was only on active duty for, 80 days. Mm-hmm. And everybody stopped asking about that, and we moved on to other much different and much bigger and more long-term problems. I'll also say that when we finally got through those last couple of boxes of his that had been tucked away in a dark corner of a bedroom closet in his apartment, we found his DD-214. It was in the envelope that the Army put it in when they mailed it to him, and it was tucked into a folder cleverly labeled miscellaneous because it had absolutely no relevance to his life at the time, has absolutely no meaning, and that's all we really know about my father's military service. Now that I'm approaching that age myself, I am hearing from those adult children of other veterans of the Vietnam era, some of the World War II guys, maybe even a few from Korea. Same problem. Hey, dad was, mom was, and we don't know, and what's a DD-214 and where do we get one? And it's a significant issue among elders. So you are maybe leading in a direction of get your VA disability screening for yourself and for your family. Great. But also get it because right now is when you have the best memories, the clearest memories, and the most documentation that you will ever have. For the rest of your life, it's all slowly sliding downhill and getting worse and less clear. And that's another compelling reason among all the other millions of stressors you have as you're leaving the military to get your VA disability screening and get that stuff entered into the records and have it available for your family in case someday you can no longer take care of it for yourself.
Okay, so that was your father. So he ended up, there was no VA benefits there, but
back then in the 1950s, the rule was you had to be either in a combat zone or for a certain number of days under wartime. There was a wicket, and it was fairly straightforward, and I knew enough about, so it was pretty clear. And today there are different rules. I think it involves 180 days. What essentially I can do to help a family that might not have these records is say, well, if you don't have a DD-214, tell me what the dates were that if you know, and we can look it up and we can tell you where to look. And the National Records Archives will be able to spit out a DD-214 for you. There was a period in the 80s and 90s where veterans were encouraged to actually take their DD-214 down to the local county courthouse and register their DD-214 as a public record. And the idea was that if you did end up sleeping under a highway overpass or however else your life went off the rails, at least you had a place where you could go to get a copy of your DD-214 fairly quickly, and you didn't have to depend on the National Archives. Now, of course, we're not supposed to do that anymore because your Social Security number would be all over the internet in a minute. But these are the kinds of mechanisms that you see in the elder veterans and their families as they try to navigate those benefits without knowing even where to start.
So talk to me about your personal experience. So did you file a VA disability claim as you were leaving the service? And that was in the early 2000s, right?
I retired in June 1, 2002. And to put this in context, we were just starting to see veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq. And I looked at what I was seeing in our local hospital. You're familiar with Triple Harmony Medical Center. And I was looking at what we were seeing in the waiting room at Tripler and at the VA clinic. The very first reaction I had was those people need the VA a lot more than I do. I am not going to clog up the pipeline with my whiny little concerns about my knees or my tinnitus. And I did not. And when I was going through the transition plan, the transition program, the seminar that everybody has to go through to separate or retire from the military, I was sitting there listening to the veteran service officer from a local clinic talk to the entire TAP class. And he said, if you want to come up to me afterward, we'll make an appointment. You can see me anytime this week during TAP. He was very available. The VA reached out and made the message, and I didn't see how it applied to me. I didn't feel ill. I didn't feel injured. I was already financially independent. I didn't feel like I needed the VA's help for anything. He talked a lot about preferences for civil service for military veterans. And if you had a VA disability rating of a certain percentage, then you could get a certain number of points added on your application for the federal civil service. And there were people in the room that were very interested in that. And again, big crowd of people around the VSO. I look at that and I say, well, I don't think there's anything there that I need. I'm certainly not going to go try and get a job after I retire if I'm financially independent. Now, this is all something I'm just going to let go and go take care of other things with my spouse and not worry about VA disability. And so we did. And it literally took me another 3 or 4 years to realize that I might have had some problems with my knees during active duty. And this surfaced later on in martial arts training as a retiree. And you can go back in your records back then and say, oh, that's what that problem was in the medical records back in, the 1990s. And later on, a friend of mine, he and I are good friends today, but I didn't really make an acquaintance with him until around 2007, 2008. When he retired in 2011, his veteran's disability rating was not only 100% permanent and total, but he also was immediately placed on Social Security disability income. He had enough issues. And I learned a lot from him. For example, I learned one of the things that he did to navigate that process. He's one of those classic examples of needs the services and benefits the most and is the least able to handle the system. He actually took an audio recorder with him to the compensation and pension exams, even the psychiatric interviews from the doctors. And with their permission, he would lay that audio recorder on the table and record everything, both what he was saying to the doctor and the doctor's comments. He also had an advocate, a friend of his that went in there as an advocate, and the friend had a list of the questions they needed to ask. And he just kept my friend on track. Hey, well, you're going to ask the doctor this, you're going to talk about that, and the other thing. That got him through the screening process and put it all into his record. And the happiest person in the world to have that done is his spouse. He's the second happiest person in the world. And so we talked about that. I said, gee, maybe there really is something I need to do with this VA disability screening process. And then by this time, I had been retired for 11 years. I went to my civilian doctor, the one that I'd been using with TRICARE Prime and TRICARE Select, and said, I'm getting ready to file a VA disability claim. I'd like a copy of all my medical records I've had from you guys for the last 11 years. And they just stared at me. And they said, well, after 3 years, we take all your records and put them in a warehouse. And after 7 years, we transfer all that to a website and we just have a summary. And if you don't see us at least once every 3 years, and in case in your situation it's been 4.5 years already, we treat you as a new patient and start all over again. I said, all right, fine. I'll take whatever you got. Whatever you can give me to show that there is a continuing problem after retirement, I will take that and hope that the VA can understand that. And they said, oh, great, that'll be $75 a copying fee, please. Okay, great. I can afford a $75 copying fee. How many veterans do you know that are getting out of the military who would be happy to pay that? And we eventually got into the VSO's office, and he did that 20-minute paging through my record. And he, the veteran service officer, would say, hey, what about this elbow problem you had in 1987? We looked it up, and we read through it, and I was like, oh, yeah, I remember I banged my elbow and say, I'm fine. No, we don't need to claim that. But we did figure out it was going to be knees and tinnitus and maybe a couple other things that we were going to talk about. And we did that, and it worked out just fine. The VA system did what it was supposed to do, and everybody did their jobs right, and it all worked out great, and I started getting compensation. Now, I started out with a 30% rating. Anything less than 50% means that you actually, if you're a retiree, you use anything less than 50% to offset your pension. So what this means is that I'm getting a certain amount for pension. Now I've got a VA disability rating. We look it up in a table. It tells me what that dollar figure is, and that's how much my taxable pension has been reduced in exchange for tax-exempt, unreported VA disability compensation. For veterans, though, people who do not have a military pension, this can make a tremendous difference in your quality of life. If you come up with a VA disability rating of 30, 40, 50%, then you are automatically getting what might account to a stipend, if necessary, if you are going through chronic unemployment or other issues. So it is not a trivial amount of money. And again, I'm happy to have the compensation offsetting my pension. I'm happy to get lower income taxes. But the main thing for my personal feeling of comfort and security is knowing that all this stuff is in a record, and my daughter doesn't have to come back and say, darn it, Dad was telling me that sea story about that one time, and all those other memories that you try to reconstruct right in the middle of another family crisis, usually.
Imagine all the other things that they're going to be concerned about, and then someone says, does he qualify for any VA benefits?
Exactly.
So, one of the most common attitudes I hear is very similar to your experience, where it's, I'm healthy, or I'm fine, or you know what, I don't need the money, or I don't deserve this. Like, look, there's guys out there who took a bullet and I don't want to take anything away from them. What do you say? And personally, I have a friend in my life, and I hope he's going to listen to this podcast because I'm going to send it to him. What would you say?
I got a couple of those too. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to that? And what do you say to, and you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But I know based on his symptoms, he at least has a 50%, if not 80%, but I would bet thousands of dollars that he has 100% disability rating coming. And he has been sitting on it for, after he collects a military pension, which is great. And he has 2 children. He has a wife. He has people that are relying on his income. And I cannot drag him to talk to a VSO. So what do you say to those people? And has anything you've ever said worked?
Well, yeah, in the blog post I wrote about this, I linked to an old Super Bowl commercial. I don't even remember the product they were selling. I think it was Pepsi. But it was a series of guys in different situations with other guys beating up on each other accidentally. The wood comes screaming out of the bandsaw and hits somebody in the back, and he limps over and says, I'm good. And another guy gets hit in the face with a golf driver on the 4th tee and the backswing and the foreswing and says, I'm good. And the end of the commercial shows a guy trying to wire something into an electrical utility pole when another buddy of his accidentally shuts the breaker and blows him across the entire yard. And as he fetches up against the garage, he sends something. He's still smoldering from his burned eyebrows. And he says, I'm good. And so I use that commercial to get the hint across that maybe you're not as good as you think. You might be the tough guy, but maybe you're not that good. The other thing that I talk to the veteran themselves about is, look, someday these memories are going to fade. And now when I tell them I've been retired for 23 years, they look at me and they say, yeah, I can see that happen. Okay, I can understand. Someday those memories are going to fade, and you're going to have trouble remembering where you were, when, with who, doing what, and why you have this thing that led to your disability rating that you have to convince 2 or 3 people in the Veterans Administration that you've got something that is worthy of compensation. So get those memories down now while you still can. Do this for your family so they don't have to do it for when you're older. And then again, we start talking about what would you do with an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a month in VA disability compensation if you were to get that, if you were to get screened and rated. What would your spouse do with that? What would your kids do that? Now, maybe you've got the GI Bill for your kids and your family, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're worried about that. Or if you're a straight veteran, now you're trying to buy health insurance on the Affordable Care Exchanges. Maybe you're trying to figure out how you're going to survive your job to get in your 50s and 60s. This one buddy of mine that's on Social Security disability income, it is because he is unable to work. His career to work is over. And now that we're approaching Social Security age, he's still going to need that income. So you start off with the mocking of, I'm good. And then trying to dial into their understanding of what life is going to be for them later on when they're unable to reconstruct the issues that led them to this point. And hopefully they'll take your point and say, okay, fine, I'm going to go talk to the VA and get this done. And if you involve their spouse and their family in a discussion, even if you have to go to their spouse and rat them out to their spouse and do some kind of intervention, maybe that's appropriate. And so that's in the cards, hey, don't make me go talk to your spouse about this. But I think you need to go talk to somebody at the VA. Now, many of them have had bad experiences with the VA. I can't fix all of the VA, but what I can tell you is that it is unevenly distributed in its quality across the nation. Here on Oahu, we have a very crowded VA disability clinic at Tripler Army Medical Center, and it's got a lot of good people there, but they have a lot of patients. They just opened a second clinic in Kapolei, and it's awesome. I love it. And the people there are the same people from Tripler. They're just working in Kapolei now, and they're much happier than having to drive through traffic to town every day. And that kind of phenomenon occurs all across the country with one clinic or another, with patient load and the quality of the doctors, the technicians that are available to bring in there. That is troublesome, and they've got to admit that they have to spend some time navigating that. Frankly, they got to admit they've got problems, and that I'm fine, I'm good. That mental block somehow has to be overcome or at least stepped around. And well, why don't you talk to the VA and have them confirm that you are indeed good, and that way you don't have to have this conversation with me anymore. Maybe that's all it takes is if they go get their VA disability screening, we will shut up and stop bothering them about it. I hear what you're going through with that friend, and every time somebody I meet up with and they start complaining about symptoms and they know that they haven't gone for their VA disability screening and they see that look I'm giving them, I don't even have to talk about it anymore, but we're slowly making progress on that. I will say that one concern is other vets are hurt more than I am, and I don't want to take away from their VA disability compensation. And the answer to that question is the VA gets more money, and the VA knows this is coming. The VA is right now, today, in 2025, more than 50 years after the end of American involvement in the Vietnam War, the VA is spending over $95 million a year for care and benefits to Vietnam War veterans. And think about how many guys you see walking around with a Vietnam War ball cap these days. It's not as much as it used to be. And it still costs $95 million. The VA knows that they have to project their budget out and be ready to handle this financial load. They don't want to skimp on veterans' disability benefits. And if they can see you now and do something as simple as hearing aids today in your 40s or 50s, they know that you're probably going to maintain your health and your mental cognition longer just because you have hearing aids. And it'll be cheaper in the long run to give you hearing aids in your 40s for 30 or 40 years than it will be to try to catch up when you're in your 70s with hearing aids. And speaking as a guy with hearing aids, I see that in the VA clinic all the time when they try to convince the veterans who just got a pair of hearing aids that this is something your family wants you to have. And again, it's a tough sell.
Yeah, it is a tough sell. I mean, in my personal experience, I haven't had a ton of contact with VA, and especially on the healthcare side, more so just on filing the claim side. But at least when I did it on Oahu, I mean, at the time, I felt like I was in excellent health. Like I had just completed a half Ironman, and about 9 months before separation, I went to the VSO. I'd gone to Air Force Medical, collected my medical records on the CD, and brought it in, and went to Disabled American Vets. They had a VSO over at Kaneohe Bay, the Marine Corps base, Hawaii over there. I ended up forgetting, I think, when I had to submit my benefits delivery on discharge, my BDD, and I missed it by like 2 days, and they're sticklers for those deadlines. So I did not end up getting my claim adjudicated before I separated, but they did schedule the appointment, the medical examination with a VA contractor while I was on Oahu. So I didn't have to fly back from New Zealand, which was good. And they took some bloods, and then I met with the VA contractor, and he had been like I can't remember, I think he was an Army medic. I mean, he was a veteran himself. And so it was just like, oh, where were you? What did you do? What have you flown on? Oh, you ever, it was such an enjoyable experience.
They speak your language.
Exactly. They speak your language, and you're not the first, whatever you are, whatever your MOS is, your AFSC, whatever your job was in the military, they have seen another one of you. Like, that's the thing with the military, is we're just not as unique as we think we are. And, we had a great chat. He went over my file. He took some measurements, of the various angles that things would bend or not bend. And, and he even had some good questions. He's like, oh, didn't you used to wear a helmet with NVGs? And I was like, yep, I've got 300 NVG hours or whatever. And he's, you didn't put that down. Let's check your neck mobility.
Oh. And
just, so like those kind of experience, and maybe I got lucky, maybe I got the best VA examiner, on the planet, but it was quite, for me, and I consider myself a pretty lucky guy as it is, it really was just go to the VSO, they file the initial paperwork, you go to the examination, maybe there's 1 or 2 follow-ups. For me, there was no follow-ups other than after they gave the first disability rating. There was a couple other things that they wanted to double check, and then they gave me the final rating. And for some of the things I submitted, it was a 0. They rated it 0%. And I think that's the other thing that people, the tough guy or the person who says I don't deserve this, that they don't realize is that there's still a process here. There's a medical examination being performed. So like, for example, I have a cut on a laceration on my finger, and it has no impact on my mobility, but it did happen while I was on active duty, and it's right there in my medical records. And I was seen by, military medicine, and it has a scar on it. And so the VSO was like, submit for that. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes, like that is one of the conditions that, that you can claim: disabilities, diseases, injuries, residuals thereof. That's what they talk about with a service connection. And I was on active duty, so the service connection is pretty easy to establish. They came back and they said 0%. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. Like, I don't really have any argument with that, but it just shows that. But like, what if one day, like it gets, I don't know, there's a long-term infection, or as arthritis builds over the years, all of a sudden, I can bend every other finger except for that one. So I think that's to those tough guys and to those guys who say, I don't deserve this, or, I'm fine, I'm healthy. It's like, that's great, but If you have a military medical record, which if you served on active duty, you do, just go have a chat with a VSO. And I would be shocked if a VSO has ever looked at any military medical record and said, no, you're good. Don't file any claim at all.
Yeah, just leave us alone.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite incredible the person that you are when you join the military, unless you just do like 180 days mobilization or something. Even if you do one enlistment or for an officer, 1 4-year tour to pay back your ROTC or your service academy, it would be quite incredible if after those years that you were exactly the same physically, mentally, health-wise as you were when you entered. And that's what the VA disability compensation process is there to just keep an eye on and say, no,
maybe this would have happened if you were a civilian. Maybe this would have happened at Google or at Ford Motor Company or at General Electric. Maybe you would have had the same symptoms, the same injuries, the same syndromes, the same complications, and the same impairments in your ability to provide for your family. Maybe the question isn't, why is the VA being so nice to me? Why is the military taking care of me like this? Maybe the question should be, why isn't the rest of American industry taking care of their veterans and their industries the way that the military takes care of us? I will talk about a story with that 0% disability rating. 2 points on that. The first one is check your state Veterans Affairs Department website to find out what your eligibilities are if you have a VA disability rating. And I'm not talking a 10% or a 30% or a 75% rating. I'm talking about a 0% VA disability rating in the state of California will automatically render your children eligible for a state college tuition, fees, room and board.
Wow.
A 0% VA is going through the process and coming out 0%. Yep. CalVets gives your kids a college education. So I'm sure that happens in other states across America. If there's not a scholarship, there's certainly some kind of tax break or some kind of other benefit for families of military veterans who have a VA disability screen. That's one point. When I went through my screening in 2016 and got back the list, one of the things on the list was a 0% disability rating for sinusitis and rhinitis, because both of those had popped up occasionally during my career, but they weren't considered a big deal. It was considered a one-time thing. Oh, he's been on a submarine. Wow, it's a real shock to us that he had a problem with rhinitis and sinusitis. Right. It's the atmospheric control equipment, not the nuclear reactor. We were on travel in Japan in 2023. We were having a wonderful time when I came down with the worst sinus headache I had ever had in my entire life to this point. And when I finally got back to the doctor on Oahu, and I ended up with the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he said, you've had so many instances of sinusitis infections over the years that your sinuses in this one area are permanently scarred. And they're no longer draining very well. And we can work on stuff like that. But you've really damaged them and they're scarred up and they're messy and it's going to be a problem. And, here's 30 days of antibiotics and a whole bunch of antihistamines and a whole bunch of other things to treat yourself with. If we can get your sinus to start draining normally again, then maybe we won't have to go in there and, trigger warning, we won't have to go in there and drill out a hole in your sinus to allow the mucus to drain out of your head. And I said, gee, where did this come from? Why would this? And we managed to track this back down through my medical records with a new context. I went back through all 1,000 pages of that and I wrote down every time I'd gone to the doctor with a sinus infection or every time I'd had a respiratory infection, just a cold. And it was happening at least once a year, if not 2 and 3 times a year. Yeah, I was a parent of a newborn and I was sleep deprived and I chronically fatigued and I came down with a respiratory infection. Yeah, I was out there doing something and I worked really hard and was in contact with people and got a respiratory. Yeah, I was, caught a case of the flu and it led to a respiratory. It turns out that's not normal. And when I went back to the VA with this and went for the compensation pension exam with the doctor, the other ear, nose, and throat doctor with the VA, he said, oh, wow, this is not normal at all. And you've already given us all this stuff. And it's already been in your VA disability claim file since time 10 years ago that you filed. And yeah, we'll take care of this right away. And they did. And so it's refreshing to know that as I got older and my health declined, that we were able to take this and put it into a new context and say, yes, this is definitely a problem, because you don't, on your separation physical or your retirement physical, you do not normally meet with an ear, nose, throat doctor or get a full body scan or anything else that is available possibly today for symptoms like that. And so the VA was able to follow up with that and take it appropriately. And, I'm taking a lot more care on my sinuses than I used to. It's that old joke from Satchel Paige. If I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. But at least I'm aware of it now. and I know what to do about it. And the VA is also aware of it, and they understand what to do about it, and they're keeping an eye out as I get older, if necessary.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show. Hey, Jamie, we got a lot of great people out there listening to the podcast. Any resources you'd like to point them to continue the education on financial independence in the military?
Yeah, if you're getting value out of this podcast, but you just want a little more detail or some more practical steps, you got to check out the Military Money Manual book by Spencer Reese, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom. In here, Spencer laid out everything that he wished he had been told when he first joined the military, and it's going to help you build wealth and take advantage of your benefits while you're serving on active duty or in the reserves or in the Guard.
The Military Money Manual is available on Amazon, Audible, and my website, shop.militarymoneymanual.com in hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. Podcast listeners are eligible for a special discount by using promo code PODCAST when you purchase the Military Money Manual on shop.militarymoneymanual.com. For the financially independent veteran, I mean, we might have somebody listening to this show who's approaching military retirement, and they're going to be collecting, a substantial military pension for the rest of their life. And in fact, if they take the SPB, then their spouse will continue to collect a portion of that pension for the remainder of their natural life, with some caveats. And they might have saved with I think a lot of the financial education is getting through to people, and the financially savvy officers and enlisted are putting money into the thrift savings plan and their Roth IRA, into other taxable brokerage accounts, and saving for retirement. And, you might have someone listening to this who's about to start collecting nearly six figures in military pension, plus they have several $1 million of savings, and say, look, I don't need the money. What would you say to that individual?
I would tell them again, someday you may be in a situation where you need extended long-term care, either in a full care facility or home care. Somebody other than you is possibly going to have to coordinate your care and make sure that you get through the rest of your life. Take care of that now with your family. Get that stuff on the records of the VA. They have benefits and services that they can give you. Even if you do not need that, your family may want to take advantage of that. If you find you have too much money and you still feel guilty for taking care of these services with the VA, well, then by gosh, take your excess money and make a donation to some Wounded Warrior Project program or some other medical program for vets. But even if you are financially independent, it's most important that you get this stuff recorded now, so the memories are fresh, so it's on record, and so that your family can help take care of you as you age. And if you age well, that's great. It was never a problem. You did what you needed to do just in case. But if you age less than well and things crop up, at least it's on record and your family knows how to take care of you. That's the bare minimum right there. I would say that anybody who is already financially independent on active duty, getting ready to retire or separate financially independent, and wants to know what the next step in their life is, contact me. I can take you through that. I can walk you through that. I've got 2 decades of experience at that, and I'm happy to explain what your concerns are going to be down the road. And I know other people who will be happy to sit there and talk with you as well. But that's the most important thing, is to, while you're doing the 17,000 other things you have to do to get out of the military, right? You've got that long, intimidating checklist, and somebody just told you need to have 2 root canals and do a survivor benefit plan briefing or whatever. Oh, by the way, don't forget about your VA disability claim. Imagine if we could not get out of the military until we had filed our VA disability claim. That might be what it takes to make this work.
Who was it the other day was saying that you had to go to MEPS and take a medical exam to enter the military. Why are you not then forced to go to the VA when you exit the military?
It's funny because the medical exam that you do when you separate from the military, whether you're retiring or getting out at the end of an obligation, that medical exam is determined to make sure that we can take care of you while you're on active duty of things that need to be taken care of before we dump you on the VA, because the VA gets mad at the active duty Department of Defense for dumping veterans on them with problems at active duty side. Now, the worst case I've seen of this is a friend of mine who went in for his retirement physical, and a doctor said, "I don't like your EKG one bit." And on active duty, he ended up having open heart surgery. Now, that was something that needed to be done. It could have killed him. It could have killed him anytime after he retired. So kudos to the doctors for catching that during the separation physical, because they could have just rushed through the paperwork and signed him off and, again, let the VA worry about it. But that's the kind of thing that can come up when you're dealing with a military career with sustained stress and chronic fatigue, and maybe you haven't been taking care of yourself very well. So they want to see that. And again, if they include a VA disability, the benefits delivery at discharge program that the VA has right now, I think is one step, one session or two of Congress, one federal law away from being a mandatory part of your separation process that you have to go on a checklist with your chain of command. So if it's important to the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration, well, maybe it ought to be a little more a priority for you and your family.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll mention too, just to throw another plug out there for submitting a claim, even if you're rated 0% overall. Now, if you're retiring, it's not as important because you'll get a military ID as a retiree, but as just a veteran like I did with 12 years of active duty service, getting the VA ID gives you very easy access to most military installations, and you can access, the BX and the commissary, which, might have pluses or minuses depending on what your memories of the BX and commissary are. But even more importantly, I think for me is just so many of my friends still live on military installations. And so, when I'm back on Oahu, I want to be able to get onto Pearl Harbor or get onto Hickam and just be able to visit people without saying, hey, can you give me a guest pass? Hey, can you drive me through the gate? So I think that's just another one of those little benefits that people might discount if they're not thinking about submitting their VA disability claim.
I'll leave you with one more stupid personal story. I've been going to my doctor for my vision for years. Every time my eyes get a little difficult because my vision is changing as I get older, it's called presbyopia, right? Your lenses are getting stiffer and it's harder to focus. I've been getting my contact lenses and my eyeglass prescriptions changed for years. I go to the doctor routinely for that. I go to the family doctor for exams every year. And the one thing that I never thought of that would be an issue would be talking to an audiologist. Until my entire family started sneaking up on me anywhere we were in the island. I'd be doing something. I'd be minding my own business. You know how you're in a kitchen and you're working on a microwave and you want to get something from the sink and you turn and step out and start moving over to the sink and you get what you want from the sink and you go back to the microwave oven. I started running into people all of a sudden because they were right there behind me and I didn't even know they were there. It got to the point where I learned to rotate in place and check my baffles before I started to translate to the sink. Turns out, you need an audiogram when it's like that. And I went to the audiologist at the VA and I said, I'm here at the request of my family. They're sneaking up on me. And he said, we hear that all the time. That's because you are losing your hearing. It turns out that everything that we've done in the military, even with hearing protection, even with double hearing protection, still can adversely affect our ears. Now, maybe we had the kind of bodies that were going to go deaf in our 50s all the time. Or maybe it was something we did in the military. And if you were not blatantly disregarding ear protection, if you made any attempt to use hearing protection, and it's probably splattered all through your medical record that you were trying to do the right things, then you are eligible for free hearing aids from the Veterans Administration. If they find that you have service-related hearing loss, which practically every veteran does, you are eligible for those hearing aids because there is a strong correlation between maintaining your cognition as an elder and having sufficient hearing to be able to participate in what's going on around you. The VA is finding out it's cheaper to buy you a $3,000 pair of hearing aids in your 50s or 60s than it is to try to catch up on your declining cognition in your 70s. And I see that, again, every time I sit in the VA audiology clinic. The other part about it, too, is that you discover all the advantages of having hearing aids that you never thought would apply to you because, in my mind, I'm still 25 years old.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, once my hearing aids were inserted in my ears and I started hearing that stuff, I realized how much I'd lost. And I'm able to actually electronically shut off my hearing aids anytime I want to go back to what it was like before hearing aids. And it's a pretty stark difference. And I understand now why people are sneaking up on me. So just knowing that the VA is there for every veteran, whether you have a VA disability rating for hearing or not, whether you're a retiree or not, if you feel like your hearing is not what it used to be, go talk to the VA and they will almost force you to have an audiogram. And after the audiogram is back in, if it rates it, you will be forced to take a pair of free hearing aids from the VA and learn how to use them. I'm much happier learning how to use these in my 60s. I don't know if you can tell, but these are my earbuds for this podcast, right? I don't have to have a pair of earbuds. I don't have to have a pair of wires or headset anymore. I can just stream straight through Bluetooth for the audio here. Well, it also works for Apple Music and classic rock. Ironically, now I can blast classic rock even louder in my head than I was when I was going to concerts, but that's a separate misconduct issue. The VA is aware of this and they will still give you a free pair of hearing aids. The whole point, though, is that as you're aging, if you're aging badly and you're a veteran, the VA probably has seen this before and is standing by to help.
If you're listening to this and you're a veteran or you're approaching separation or military retirement, go to a VSO, file your VA claim, and whatever reason, whatever excuse you need to make, Doug Nordman told me to do it, Spencer told me to do it, It doesn't matter. Just go start it. Go do it. If you're rated 0%, send me an email and say, man, what a waste of time that was. I was rated 0%, and maybe I'll send you a free book or something. But I think it's a very important thing that a lot of veterans, I know personally, a lot of veterans who are missing out on some of the benefits and, resources that our nation, like our Congress, can agree on very little across parties, but this is the one thing that almost every politician has said, this is sacrosanct. We are never touching this, and we have allocated the resources to make this happen. And maybe one day they'll bring in, income tests or means test or something, but that is not the reality today, and that's not even being talked about.
When military retention is so high that they're actually having to force people to leave the military again, that's when maybe I would be a little concerned about veterans benefits. But everybody who's active duty right now is watching how the veterans are treated. And if the military wants to have a high enough retention rate to do business, then we need to show that concern and that lifetime care and support for the veterans. Anybody that wants to contact me, and I'm talking mostly about family members, especially adult children or even grandchildren of elderly veterans, anybody that wants to talk about this stuff, I'm happy to talk about it. I do this all the time on Oahu, and I'm happy to do it over a Zoom call or a meeting, and I do it with several veterans already. We have a network. We're here to help, and you've got my email address, and you can splash that out on the rest of the internet that doesn't have it yet. And encourage people to come talk to me and talk to you, and we can work and figure out how to make this problem get better. We can't cure it, but we can help you get some compensation for the sacrifices that you've already paid the price.
Well, Doug, that's awesome. And you have done so much work for the military community. And, when I was first getting the blog started way back in 2011, 2012, you were one of the first people I reached out to. And so it's quite incredible to maintain this friendship and this, I'll call it a mentor-mentee relationship, because I learned so much from you. So thank you for that. MilitaryFinancialIndependence.com is where you're writing at the moment. And you've got some great stuff there. I just pulled it up, and first article I see is about the PACT Act. So that's something we didn't even touch on, but that's another very important and much easier way for veterans to receive the care that they need. And anywhere else you want to point people to? Are you on any socials or anywhere else?
I spend most of my time these days on Facebook groups. Just find me on Facebook. It's still the Military Guide Facebook page, or Doug Nordman. My profile is totally public. I'm also on some forums, the usual suspects, right? Mr. Money Mustache and Bogleheads. You mentioned those rich retirees, six-figure pensions, didn't know what to do with the money. There's another forum where we can talk more over at esimoney.com. Some people might still remember John Nardini from way back in the day, and he does a lot of good work over there too with what to do when you have enough and how to live the rest of your life with that enough.
Great. Well, thanks again, Doug. We'll have to get you on sooner than 3 years for next time.
Well, anytime. You've got a backlog of guests. I understand that. And when you run out, that's when you can give me a call.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.